Hello, good crowd. I'm almost emotional with joy, having wanted to have Bill Drayton, the CEO of Ashoka, on the show since I started doing the show 7 years ago. And finally, the day has come. We have Bill Drayton on the show. Stick around. You do not want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Bill, welcome to the show. It is a thrill to have you, Bill. Welcome.
It is a total pleasure to be here. I'm an admirer of what you've been doing for the field.
Well, you're kind. Of course, the field wouldn't exist if it weren't for you. And I feel like I am one of the infinite ripples that you've created over your career. Someone you probably were not aware of out there doing social entrepreneurship, being a change maker, not because Ashoka per se taught me, but because you created the whole system that empowers and allows for social entrepreneurship. So thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. We're excited to talk to you. I want to go back in time with you, Bill, to the founding of Ashoka. It was a remarkable, powerful insight, changed the world, continuing to change the world in infinite ways. What was going on 30, 35 years ago when this all started that brought you to start Ashoka?
Well, I just want to say first that you and your community are a major part of the constant building of new ideas and waves. And what's going on is that since 1700, the rate of change and the degree and extent of interconnection both have been going up exponentially. And those are just facts. They totally drive what's going on. And you have been totally central to that.
Well, thank you. And it is fun to be part of that historic change. And I love technology, though I will confess, the older I get, the harder new technology gets to use. Our brains, I think, don't adapt as easily in our sixth decade as they did in our first. But in any case, you got this Ashoka started 30, 35 years ago. What was going on? How did that come about?
Well, the idea actually came when I was 18 and was in India. And how do you close the north-south gap once it's no longer statistics, but it's people you know? Well, sophomores control very little. And so you look for what is the most powerful thing you can think of that you might actually be able to help make happen. And that's a big pattern change idea, but only if it's in the hands of a great entrepreneur. It's that combination that drives every major change, regardless of sector or time. And there's a moment in the life history of the person and the idea. They've finished their apprenticeship. The world is ready for this idea and they know it. But they've got to quit. The person has got to quit her or his job. And their uncles and aunts are going to say, what? You're going to quit a job with Tata Consultancy to do what? That's going to upset whom? This is difficult. And so we felt if we could intervene then, a very modest investment financially allowing the person to quit their job, work full-time on launching their vision, and be a part of a community of peers who are also great entrepreneurs with very big pattern change ideas, very strong ethical fiber. That community is the one thing that's more powerful than the idea and the entrepreneur together. And it's a very simple idea. And so it took a while, but the exact timing was right around 1980, because the post-independence generation was coming of professional age across Asia, and the generals were being pushed out in Latin America. So the end of the colonial era, the late 40s. You add 30 years and you end in 1978, and we saw it. The first wave of social entrepreneurs were coming up, and they were our friends because, of course, you know people like you. And these were people who were tired of the big bureaucracies, and they didn't want to have their lives be spent that way. And they gave themselves permission to see how to do it better in big systems, pattern change ways. So that was the right timing. And history has moved, and we're now at the second really big turning point, and maybe we can come back to that.
Yes, let's. I want to drill down just a little bit more on the founding, but let's come back to your second wave, because we are at an interesting inflection point in history, aren't we? But you talk about the fellow who leaves Tata and his aunt and uncle are concerned because you're leaving to do what? That was your experience. You were at McKinsey. And maybe that wasn't where you were when you started Ashoka, but certainly you went through that personal experience when people were saying to you, you're leaving that to do this. Tell us a little bit about that, how this came about, with that personal context.
Well, here's just some facts. For the first 5 years, we couldn't get any foundation to provide any support because it was just when people tell you foundations are equivalent to venture capital, be very polite, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And so it was friends and a few family foundations, which were really individual choices, and lots of volunteer time, which is still our most important base. So a new idea, if it's really pattern change, by definition, it's not in people's heads. We had to make up the phrase social entrepreneur. And a lot of people for the first years, the smart ones or the smart alecky ones would say that's an oxymoron. And we made up the word changemaker at the same time in the spring of 1981, sitting at Nariman Point in Bombay, as it was then called. And it only made it into the Oxford Dictionary 7 or 8 years ago. And we still haven't made it into the Webster Dictionary, to our irritation. But in the meantime, people have started using it all over the world because they need to.
Yeah.
And that's one of the measures that we are at the turning point.
That it is exciting, and I appreciate you sharing some of these nuances around the founding of Ashoka, because it is incredible. But I think part of what you're telling us is that your lived experience in founding Ashoka is in some ways the model for Ashoka itself, right? That you are providing funding for people who couldn't otherwise do the kinds of things you did when you started Ashoka itself, right? It's a virtuous cycle that's being repeated over and over. Am I thinking about this right?
Yes, we're you, the people in your community, the people in the Ashoka community, we're all helping one another help a very, very profound historic transformation take place. Until very recently, the world was defined by efficiency in repetition. Think assembly lines, law firms. The deal was you got a skill, barber, banker, and you repeated that for life in workplace with a lot of walls. Well, but I don't think this applies to you for a minute.
You're kind, thank you. But continue your thought. I interrupted. I apologize.
No, but you and our community are at the heart of a new world. It's here. It's real. It's now. And Since 1700 to now, as I mentioned earlier, rate of change and degree and extent of interconnection have been going up exponentially, each feeding the other. The demand for repetition is a causal mirror curve plunging downward. Those are the central facts. And we are all engaged, this community, in helping one another, in helping everyone in the world be able to play in the new game. And that is a central purpose. It's our central purpose. I can't imagine that it isn't central to what you're doing. The new inequality in the world is between those people who are in the new game, who have the underlying very complex abilities to contribute to change, to adapt to change, to live and work in a world not of institutions, but of fluid, open, integrated teams of teams, a radically opposite way of organizing. Well, as that game accelerates, the people in it are getting better and better because it's a team of teams. And what you do in a team is you help everyone else on the team be the best possible player. Well, the problem is that there is the other half of humanity that doesn't have these abilities, that is not in the game, and they are not moving ahead. They're falling further behind. So the new inequality, unlike all the old ones, gets worse every year. And it gets worse by a bigger amount this year than it got worse last year. So why do we have income inequality getting worse everywhere in the world? It's economics 101. There's a bidding war for people who have these abilities because every organization is desperate, has to have them. There's no lack of jobs. There's no shortage of jobs. There's a shortage of people with these abilities. And then there's the other part of humanity who the demand for them is going down exponentially. And they can't play in this new game. Now, let me give you one example. It used to be, up to this generation, that people could be accepted, good people, if they diligently followed the rules. The rate of change and of constant changing of the teams and combinations of teams means that is not an option anymore. If you try to be a good person by diligently following rules, you will hurt people, you'll disrupt groups, and you're gone. And, you know, I don't care if you're a great astrophysicist. If you hurt me, I want you out of my life, and anyone who looks like you, not so sure I want to deal with that person. Well, that's going on right now. And the worst part of it is that hundreds of millions of kids are not getting the fundamental abilities and therefore self-confidence to be able to play in the new game. Now, that is really criminal. I mean, treating anyone this way is terrible, but denying young people the opportunity to be able to contribute in life, that is really, really bad, ethically bad.
What are the skills that we need to teach these kids more specifically, and how do we teach them?
Well, to start off with cognitive empathy based living for the good of all. So those words are very careful. When you say the word empathy, typically people think, put yourself in other people's shoes, feel someone else's pain, whatever. That's a part of it. That's your mirror neurons. That's early brain, very, very important. But you have to have the other part, the cerebral cortex. They have to learn to work together. They can't, but they've got to learn how to do that so that you consciously can understand this ever more complex, ever more fast-moving environment. You just can't accept a set of rules. You have to consciously understand it. Then from there, you have to develop something much more complicated than teamwork, you have to be able to, one minute you're the leader, the next minute you're playing other roles. You don't have one workplace for life. You have different teams almost hour by hour. And that's a level of human emotional skills that is getting, again, higher every year. And then the new leadership. It's not Henry Ford having an idea and telling thousands of people to repeat for the next 50 decades. Okay, you've got to be able to understand this kaleidoscope of everything moving and changing. And you have to see further and further into the future because it's coming at you faster and faster. Oh, here's an opportunity. And then you have to invite the right team from anywhere they are in the world. And then you have to create the right synaptic architecture so that team can work together. And from that moment on, everyone in the team is helping improve the vision, how the team works together, and also the team is building in more and more teams as the idea spreads. Fluid, open, integrated team of teams architecture. Well, that is a much more powerful form of leadership. But it's also very demanding, and you have to have the first two skills to do that. And then change making itself, you have to be able to see and imagine in really very sophisticated ways. Any kid can do this. So Ashoka has about 4,000 fellows. 3/4 have changed the pattern in their field at the national or international level within 5 years. Over half have changed national policy within 5 years. Well, 1/3 of them are focused on kids. 90 to 95% of them put kids in charge. And the traditional measures, language scores go up, math scores go up, bullying rates go down. But what we're concerned about is those kids are practicing being change makers. And let me just give you a concrete example. Ashoka has Ashoka Young Change Makers and Youth Ventures. So this is a community we know very well. So we had a meeting of about 350 of these young people. I sat down at lunch, and this very small young woman came and sat to my right. She introduced herself and quickly said, "I'm 12," because I think she's sick of people thinking she's 8. All right, so what's your venture? Well, my brother is autistic, and all through school, I would cry when he was not treated well. But now we fixed that. Well, how did you do that? Well, we get together whenever we see a special student who's not being treated well, and we figure out what to do, and then we go and do it, and we're very persistent. Now that is 90% her words, and that was her gesture. I guarantee you, if you were there, you would know without one doubt that she has her PhD in the most important critical skills that she needs. She is a change maker. She knows it. She knows that she has what the world wants, and that's what every young person is struggling to do. How can I be a contributive person? She is. She's already practiced these skills, and she's going to do it again and again, and she's brought a whole bunch of kids along with her. Now, there are about 1 million schools that Ashoka Fellows around the world have put kids in charge in. Very poor, not all, but almost all fellows are dealing with kids from poorer communities. There is no problem with the kids. They can dream, they can build a team, they can change their world if we'll give them 1/10 of a chance. But we've got to do that. And that requires a redefinition of what success in growing up is. Now, I'm sure that there are many young people and parents and grandparents who are here. Well, ask yourself, is your daughter practicing change making like the young woman I just described? Does your daughter have her power? Does America, does any country have a future if all our kids don't have this? Well, that's what we've got to do. And any parent can do this. You know, your 12-year-old comes home and says a lot of kids are having trouble with math or whatever it is. Put everything down. I'm really proud of you for having seen that problem. What do you think you could do about it? Oh, you encourage. That's a sort of interesting idea. Why don't you get your friends together and do it? Yeah, you can do it. Now, she's not going to do it right away because you've surprised her.
Mm-hmm.
But she's really like this because you're assuming that she can. So she'll come back with the next problem and the next problem. And the fourth or fifth time, she'll come back with her idea. And then the hardest part, don't take over. And don't let her brother or some teacher take over. That really is the hardest part because that's breaking the whole system, the way things are now done. So any parent can do this. And if your daughter does this, then she's creating a group in the school and you get 4 or 5 kids who do that. 5 kids out of 500, and all of a sudden there are 80 kids, 100 kids saying, come and join us, use our service. Well, who is a better possible marketer than those kids? And they have their power. And what kid, for that matter, what human being doesn't want to have the power to be able to give? And then you tip the culture. And boy, it doesn't go back once that's happened.
Interesting, interesting. As you think about, if going back to something you said earlier, you talked about this divergence between people who are change makers and can cope with change and those who are not and can't now. One of the things that we're seeing is a huge income disparity that's getting worse around the world. Which is leading to, or at least contributing to, an us versus them dialogue also happening around the world. And we see some of you alluded to this idea of not respecting people who look like someone we had a bad experience with. So there's this, it seems to be contributing to increased racism. Again, not just an American problem. Around the world, there's more nationalism, et cetera, et cetera. Is educating kids about change making, is that the solution? If not, what is?
We have to help everyone be a change maker. Kids are the most important because it's most criminal to ensure that a kid has no future. I mean, I just think that's wildly terrible. But it's terrible for adults too. If you go to South Ohio and some other parts of our country, you're going to see people who have lost hope. We have basically said to them, as they perceive it, go away. We don't need you. It's your fault. And by the way, your kids don't have much of a future. Well, why do you think we have an opioid problem? People are depressed. And when you're depressed, what happens? You get angry. And when you get angry at someone, i.e. the people who are telling you to go away. And that's where the us versus them politics come from. And it's reinforced by the income distribution getting worse and worse and worse. And it's just, look at just the last 5 years, how much the us versus them politics has swept across the world. And the roots were there before, but we've reached a point where it's become highly contagious. And because the new inequality gets worse every year, the depression and the anger gets worse. It is absolutely critical that we tear that wall down and we help everyone, regardless of age, everyone be able to contribute. Now, we know how to do that. We have some very simple mechanisms, and we've been working with businesses and citizen groups and faith communities to help their members. So we know this can be done. But this is so big. It's a fundamental change in how we define society and life and the skills we have to have. And it's a classic turning point. I mentioned how the word changemakers, that's a 40-year-old invention, 39 years. And it's only in the last, 5, 6, 7 years that it suddenly has swept the world because people need it. And we're entering the tipping point years. So this is a ground for being very hopeful. But those of us who have, because of our parents and a whole series of gifts we were given, we are able to play in this game. We've got to help the people who are not. And the key is we've got to help them understand, help the whole society understand. It's not hard to change what happens in the schools, but we have to imagine it. What parent, I just described a really simple thing that any parent can do. You don't have to change the whole society of the school system. Your daughter comes home and says, there's a problem. Well, you can get her going. And if you work with a couple of other parents, then you can get the school going. And so we're also we're building partnerships with what we call jujitsu partners. So very powerful organizations that are important to this particular framework change. So education unions, publishers, ed schools, and select political units. And in Brazil, we're furthest along on this. We have about a dozen of these very powerful organizations. They're totally on this. The Union of School Supervisors, for example. And in this country, we're developing a partnership with the AFT and beginning to work with some of the others, some of the universities. Well, we also have co-leadership with some of the Ashoka Fellows and the Ashoka Young Changemakers. Garvita Gulharti was here just over the last few days because Facebook called her in from India. She's one of the Ashoka Young Changemakers there. So when she was 15, she got upset about water wastage. So she created Why Waste. And now restaurants all over Bangalore and increasingly other cities fill your glass up only half full. And this is spreading internationally. And then a couple of years ago, she had, I now have this amazing superpower. She had the same thing that this young woman, the 12-year-old with the autistic brother had. And once you know you have that, what do you want to do? You want everyone to have it. And so she took the Ashoka Lead Young Stories. And if any of your folks would like, we can send a free monthly video of a young person, her dream, her team, her changed world. And it's good for conversations, planting ideas, etc. So she took those stories and she invented the methodology of getting a different student in her high school to present a story in assembly once a week. Well, you quickly build up a number of students who really get into this. And then people starting there. You can see how that works. Then she took it to 38 other schools in Bangalore and other cities and now to publishers. Well, this is a young person who is co-leading this movement every bit as much as you or I. And she can say things and have an impact that you or I can't have.
Yeah, amazing. As you reflect on your work over the last several decades, what are you most proud of having accomplished?
Well, I think we have helped many people give themselves permission to care, to organize, to be powerful, to be a giver, to be a change maker. And we now have the challenge, how do we make sure that everyone gets that gift? And the biggest gift is the ability to give. And there's nothing that brings more health, happiness, longevity. All the great prophets said that. Science tells us that. And we are just so privileged that the Ashoka community is right at the heart of this. So you take those 4,000 Ashoka fellows, and you look, what are the patterns? 90 to 95% of the 1,300 focused on kids put kids in charge. Now, what I've just told you is probably the only really good focus group looking into the future. Most focus groups are not very good. They're great if you want to choose whether your product should be purple or pink, because people, that's in their heads. But what is not in your head is what the world is going to be like in the future, because you're more likely to have the past there. But great entrepreneurs do not bet their life on an idea, not having any idea of what the world is going to be like in 15 years. That's a fool's errand, and entrepreneurs don't do that. So we have the ability through looking at these patterns. It's a very powerful indicator of what's needed. And then for the last 12 years, we've come to consciously understand it's an everything changing world. Therefore, everyone has to be a change maker. You can't get up in the morning thinking you're going to play soccer because the game is now chess. Well, we see that. Well, you put these two independent avenues, and so far they always say the same thing. Put kids in charge, for example. And then over the last 5 years, we've evolved this new methodology of how we work together to actually get the framework change to change. And this is now really working in Brazil. We hope it will work here in the next year or so. India, Indonesia, the really big countries are our first priority. And what I hope we will see is quite literally everyone a giver, everyone a change maker, everyone.
Well, that is powerful. That is powerful. You talked about a little bit about the little girl's superpower. What is your superpower?
So when it looks at roots, I had two parents who did crazy things when they were 19. And so they had in them a comfort with me doing things, and they were supportive. And I grew up in Manhattan. And so there was no station wagon prison. There was a free bus and subway pass once you were allowed to cross the street. And it was the time of the civil rights movement. And I had a principle, I couldn't stand all this memorization stuff. And so I didn't do it very much. Loved history and geography, but math and French, please. And you can tell I'm not built for contact sport. I'm always the crash sheet, which limits my enthusiasm for it. So I started a newspaper, and it became a newspaper that grew and grew and grew once I was able to buy a mimeograph machine, which I bet you very few people have any idea what that technology is.
I'm married to a school teacher. I'm very familiar with it.
Well, that was open sesame for me. And, I had a principal who I learned many years later. He prevented conflict. He reassured, even my parents needed reassurance. And that was just a huge gift. So we all have to understand the roots of this. And, I was given the gift of being able to imagine and go and do things and build things. And every time you do that, you get better at it and you're able to give at a bigger level and help more people grow more. This is very contagious.
Yeah, fantastic. Bill, we've gone way over our allotted time. I appreciate so much you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, if you would just take one more minute and tell people how they can learn more about Ashoka and how they can connect with you, that would be great.
We would love anyone who wants to join this movement. Let us know, ashoka.org.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in continuing your work to make everyone a change maker.
And thank you. You are central to this.
Well, thank you very much. Let's do some good.
Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good.
Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.